It's good for our environment. It's good for the American people. This bill is just another recycled bad idea designed to go nowhere. Doubling down on oil drilling may be good policy for oil companies. It's terrible policy for the American people. This amendment would help stop these gains. I urge my colleagues to respect the will of California voters and support this amendment.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have?
The gentleman from Washington has 2 minutes remaining.
I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make this point. The fundamental reason for H.R. 2231 is to expand energy production in American waters. This amendment would put another moratorium, goes the opposite direction. And furthermore, this amendment would eliminate revenue sharing, which has worked so well in the Gulf Coast. But here's a point I want to make specifically at California that was not made by my two colleagues on the other side of the aisle from California. This legislation directs that any offshore drilling should come from existing rigs onshore. That is possible to do, Mr. Chairman, because of the new technologies, horizontal drilling, that the oil industry has done for several years. It works. As a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, the governor of the state of California, Jerry Brown, has proposed precisely that for state waters. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle from California didn't mention that. I don't know why they didn't mention it, because their governor is in favor of that process. And what this bill does is simply mirror that by saying we'll do that on federal waters. I think my colleague from California, Mr. McClintock, put it in a very good way. California, like the United States, needs a jump start in the economy. The best way to do that is through energy production, providing a certainty of energy for a growing economy in the future. And with that, I urge rejection of the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
All time having expired, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Gentlelady from California.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 113-131, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 8 by Mr. DeFazio of Oregon. Amendment number 9 by Mr. Brown of Georgia. Amendment number 10 by Mr. Grayson of Florida. Amendment number 11 by Ms. Capps of California. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in the series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report 113-131 by the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report number 113-131, offered by Mr. DeFazio of Oregon.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Congress is wrapping up their work week ahead of the July 4th recess. The Senate finished yesterday passing the immigration bill 68-32. The House today wrapping up work on a bill that would expand offshore oil and gas drilling by opening up new areas for leasing. The Obama administration Wednesday issued a veto threat on the bill, saying in part, quote, it would establish unworkable deadlines and substantive and procedural limitations on important environmental review. Votes here on 4 amendments that they debated this morning. This first vote is 15 minutes. The remaining amendment votes, 2-minute votes. It's an amendment by Peter DeFazio, which would prohibit offshore oil and gas leases in the Bristol Bay off the coast of Alaska. It's a 15-minute vote, and again, 3 more amendment votes after this. And during this vote, we're going to bring you some background on the overall offshore drilling bill. Is energy and environment reporter with National Journal Daily. Why has the Obama administration issued a veto threat against this House offshore drilling bill?
This legislation the House is going to be voting on is very similar to the bill that the House Republicans have pushed in the prior Congress, which is to open up areas on the offshore of the United States to oil and natural gas drilling that the administration does not want to open. And so the administration predictably has issued a veto threat to this bill, but the Republicans keep pushing it because it is a salient political message for both the campaign season and because it's something their members like.
What are some of the areas that this bill would open up?
This bill would open up different areas of the Gulf of Mexico, on the California coast, and the eastern shore of the United States. Depending on which part of the United States, the years differ a little bit, but most of them are done by about 2020. And
any idea of what the volume, how much energy, how much oil and gas are these new fields supposed to yield?
The Republicans like to point out that it could significantly increase how much oil we produce in the United States. But something that I attended a briefing with the House Majority Whip Kevin McCarthy, who's involved with this bill, along with the sponsor, House Natural Resources Chairman Doc Hastings. They talk a lot about how this can really help the jobs and the energy security of the United States. But what they don't talk about, which is one of the biggest oil developments in the country, is a lot of the oil in North Dakota. And this is just one more piece of the pie that they think can help us get closer to energy independence.
And what are Democrats in the House arguing against the bill?
They're arguing that it's moving forward drastically with drilling that ignores the environmental impacts of this drilling. It's one of those debates that we've seen time and time again, and you're seeing the Democrats in the House miles and miles apart from the Republicans in the House. And they have this debate over and over again because energy, and specifically drilling, is one of the few issues that the House Republican Conference is very united upon. And so it's easy for Speaker Boehner to move these bills because he knows it will unite his conference, unlike some issues such as immigration and the Farm Bill.
Well, the bill comes on the heels of President Obama's major speech Tuesday on the environment and energy regulations. Your National Journal article headline said that the Republicans are answering Obama with a drilling bill, and in that article you point out the president saying we don't have time for a meeting of the Flat Earth Society. What's the president's point in this?
The president is saying that the science behind climate change, that the fact the humans' consumption of fossil fuels is exacerbating climate change with a rise in greenhouse gas emissions is so compelling that it demands action immediately. And yet the Republicans in the House are pretty blind to this science, and so they're moving forward somewhat ironically a day after the president announced this climate change plan with these more ambitious drilling plans. And it's further evidence of how far apart President Obama and a lot of the Democratic Party is with the Republicans in the House and also many Republicans in the Senate.
Will the drilling bill pass in the House?
It will definitely pass. You will hear the debates on the floor about the potential job creation for more drilling, and then the Democrats concerned about environmental degradation of the land. But once again, like most drilling bills in the House, it will be dead on arrival in the Senate. Although I will say that one portion of the bill, which would increase revenue sharing for offshore states to be able to take some of the money that the oil companies pay in royalties to the federal government so that the states can have a piece of that pie, that idea has gained traction in the Senate with Senator Murkowski and Senator Landrieu, a Democrat from Louisiana and a Republican from Alaska.
Amy Harder is energy and environment reporter for National Journal. You can follow her stories at nationaljournal.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And the House is now voting on the first of 4 amendments to that offshore drilling bill. Again, the administration issuing a veto threat against the bill, saying they, quote, strongly oppose the bill. It would undermine the targeted, science-based and regionally tailored offshore development strategy that the American people and the states have helped to develop. That's from the White House statement of administration policy. 4 amendment votes here. We expect a Democratic motion to recommit and final passage shortly as well. And that will do it pretty much for the House ahead of the July 4th recess next week. The Senate finished up their work passing the immigration bill yesterday by a vote of 68 to 32. So immigration debate next heads to the U.S. House. And a couple of things on that. We earlier today, just a while ago, as a matter of fact, covered a discussion on immigration with 2 of the members of the so-called House Gang of 7, Republican Mario Diaz-Balart and Zoe Lofgren of California, the Democrat. You should be able to find that discussion shortly in our video library at cspan.org. We also spoke this morning to another member of that Gang of 7, Illinois Congressman Luis Gutierrez, on Washington Journal this morning. We're going to bring you as much of that conversation as we can as this 15-minute vote continues.
And we're back with Congressman Luis Gutierrez, Democrat of Illinois, member of the Judiciary Committee, and also the Immigration Task Force Chairman for the Hispanic Caucus. You've been a lead voice for immigration reform for House Democrats, for the Democratic Party. When it passed yesterday, 68 to 32, what did you think about the prospects in the House?
I think the prospects in the House are good. I think the prospects of the House are good if we continue to understand that things happen in Washington, D.C., as long as there's a consistent and persistent demand outside of Washington, D.C. We should understand that vote of 68 to 32, there is an immense power in America for comprehensive immigration reform. It is broad, and it is deep, and it is powerful, and it is now going to visit the House of Representatives. And I think that you are not going to be able to stop the will of the American people, which was clearly voiced on November 6th. They said, you know, stop the bickering and the fighting, stop picking winners and losers on immigration, stop scapegoating and criminalizing, because we're going to elect the party that says we want to fix immigration. And that's the party that won the election. And I hope that the House of Representatives heeds the will of the people as demonstrated on Election Day, November 6th.
What gives you hope? The Speaker yesterday saying that Senate bill is dead on arrival. We're going to meet after this 4th of July break. We're working piecemeal along here, but we're not just going to take up the Senate bill.
You know, but surprise, it's Washington, D.C., and they're not taking up the Senate bill. I've been here 21 years. I cannot remember the last time the House of Representatives simply got together and said, oh, thank you, senators, you wise, able men and women right in the upper chamber. We're going to take your legislation. That's not the way it works. Anybody that watches Washington, watches watches the way things work here in Washington, D.C., knows that the House has a process, the Senate has a process. That's why you have conference reports. I mean, when Frank Dodd got written, right, to restructure our financial system, Dodd did something. Nobody said, oh, my God, Barney Frank's actually going to craft his own response to the... No, listen, even when Democrats are in charge of each of the chambers, each one puts its own imprimatur. Okay, so then what does it look like in the end when the House comes up with their legislation and the Senate has theirs and the two sides get together? Oh, I think you have a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people. The first thing you do is you put them in a safe place. You say that you're going to protect those families. I think a lot of people just have a misunderstanding who the 11 million are. The 11 million, most of them have been here for more than 10 years. A third of them have been here for more than 15 years. There are 4.5 million American citizen children whose parents are undocumented in this country. They work and they're a part of our nation. They've been interwoven into the fabric of the communities that they live in. So what we want to do is say, hey, listen, we wanted you to get right with the law, right? You're here undocumented today. What we want to do is give you an opportunity to, A, register with the government. And what does that mean? That means we want your fingerprints. We want to do a thorough background check. We want to make sure you're not a criminal. We want to make sure you've never committed a criminal offense. And let me just make clear, it's a civil offense to be working in the United States undocumented. Although the Republicans would like, in one fell swoop, to change the law and make them all criminals. You think anything that the House does includes a pathway to citizenship. But take a look at this. Here's a poll that was done recently that asked Republican voters, if your senator or representative voted for an immigration reform law that included a pathway to citizenship for people currently here illegally, would that make you more likely or less likely to support that official for re-election? Republicans said 49% less likely. Yeah, well, I think we do the will of, I mean, and you know what? That's kind of what's happening, isn't it, in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, what occurred was Republicans and Democrats came together. And as you saw, as the legislation developed, you see a Democratic majority yielding and yielding and yielding to a Republican minority in order to craft a bill that could get 68 votes yesterday. So in the House of Representatives, unfortunately, all we're getting is a Republican response in the judiciary. We don't have a bipartisan response in the House of Representatives. When I asked Chairman Goodlatte, when are we going to begin, he kind of turns around dismissively and says, well, Luis, you had a chance to work with my majority and you didn't reach a bill, and so I'm taking up these bills. Well, that's not exactly the way it works in Washington, D.C. He is the chairman of the committee. He can at any point reach out and say, Luis, I understand you were with Paul Ryan in Chicago. I understand you were with Congressman Carter in San Antonio. I've seen that you're working in good faith with Republicans. Do you need some help? How can I help you? That's leadership. Referring to the Gang of Seven, Raul Labrador left, you were a Gang of Eight. Yes. Are you still meeting? There's been reports out you were going to be putting out some sort of legislation. Haven't seen it yet. Have you put any pen to paper? Where does it stand? It's done. It's been drafted. The legislative language is there. It's a little over 500 pages. We're simply waiting for our Republican colleagues at this point to read it and accept it so that we can build. I still believe in a bipartisan approach in the House of Representatives, and I'm still hopeful that we're going to be able to get one. Look, there are dozens of Republicans who want comprehensive immigration reform, but I think the way you got to do this is you got to let the House have an opportunity to voice its will. Let me just say, when there was legislation proposed to take away power from the president vis-a-vis the Dreamers, young immigrant youth that came here as children, and the president offered them deferred action. That is to say, he didn't legalize them. He said, I'm not going to deport you. I'm going to give you a work permit until the Congress of the United States. You know, there were Republicans who proposed legislation that actually passed to take that power away from the president. 198 out of 201 Democrats voted against it. That's a solid bedrock, right, for comprehensive immigration reform. But we need an opportunity for 30 Republicans to join us. Will they allow a vote? They say, we'll only allow a vote of the majority of the majority. In other words, we'll only allow a Republican vote. Is that really what they sent us to the Congress of the United States to do? To only allow things where there's a majority of the majority?
Well, the Speaker did say yesterday he would like the Gang of Seven to keep working, to keep meeting, that he's going to need all ideas, which you said you've put pen to paper. It's 500 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Which Republicans are reading it right now before you put it out there?
Congressman Carter, Congressman Johnson, and Diaz-Balart. And I know that there are others that we can have join us. I really believe that given all of the energy that's coming over from the Senate and all of that organizational capacity that's coming over from the Senate, from diverse groups. I mean, we're talking evangelicals to Catholics, right? To, you know, like Republican pundits and Democratic pundits, labor unions and Chamber of Commerce, you name it. It's a very diverse and very powerful and deep group. Republican leaders and Democratic elder statesmen. I mean, it's really broad and deep. And those voices are coming to engage the House of Representatives.
The Gang of Seven in the House, your bill is 500 pages. The bill that just passed in the Senate yesterday, 1,200 pages. Why such a big difference? What's in that bill, in the Senate bill?
But, you know, we each have our ways of going about the process. Obviously, senators add a lot of things, right? Because if you're a senator, you just add a few pages because that's what you want for your vote. That's a pretty accurate description of Senate tradition. That's why when you look at Senate bills, you find, what does this have to do with anything? Well, it has to do with that the senator wanted it in there for their vote. And that's how they got 69 votes, and that's the way they built it. Look, important is what issues we are addressing. I just heard my friend, Congressman Collins, keep saying, well, it was the promise of 1986 that we would secure the border. Well, no. There was no promise in 1986 that we would secure the border. None. Read the bill. It was the promise that we would fix this and that illegals wouldn't be able to come here. What the 1986 legislation did say is that we would have employer sanctions. But let me tell you what happened. As soon as those employer sanctions under a Ronald Reagan administration, followed by a George Bush, the father administration. And here's what happened when they imposed them. You know what happened? Down in Georgia, when they didn't have anybody to deal with the chickens or to pick the onions or to pick the crops, they would call their Republican senator and would say, hey, could you tell those enforcement people to get out of here? We need these people to be working our fields and working our poultry fields. So let's make very clear, this is very different. There won't be any phone calls from senators or members of Congress because we're going to have an enforcement procedure that doesn't allow them to intervene.
Let's get our viewers involved in our conversation here. Vista, California. Cindy's been waiting. Independent caller. Welcome. Go ahead, Cindy.
Every politician running for office last November campaigned vigorously on jobs. So why on earth would any of these elected officials be even thinking about passing this bill, which so hugely increases the number of workers coming into our country, flooding our country?
Okay, Cindy, let's take that point.
Well, actually, that's not what happens in the bill. In the bill, you legalize the 11 million that are already here. The CBO score, the Senate proposal says that they create such economic activity that they actually reduce the deficit by $175 billion during the first 10 years. And they reduce it by another $700 billion in the subsequent 10 years. And let me make clear, read the Senate proposal. Don't just listen to what people say. Read the Senate proposal. It says legalize, pay all your back taxes, pay taxes for the next 10 years, but don't expect a dollar from the government. I heard again my colleague Congressman Collins says, oh, well, we already got Obamacare, now we're going to add all the illegals. Wrong, incorrect. They are specifically excluded from any subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. Not one subsidy, not $1, and they can't get Medicare. We took care of that in 1986, but it's been reiterated for Obamacare. So they pay all of the taxes, yet cannot derive a single benefit during the first 10 years.
We had a previous caller ask if the 11 million that are here, once they become or have legal status, can they bring their family over? Does that number of 11 million go up?
The number of 11 million can go up in this sense. Those that are here are already going to be integrated with their families. So I imagine the caller wouldn't want the undocumented worker to get documented and not live with his American citizen children and his American citizen spouse. So the way the program is decided, if I'm undocumented, I obviously, all my minor children, right, under the age of 18, get to be incorporated in the program along with my wife.
I think the caller was referring to people coming from other countries, Mexico, to join their families, to join the family member who has just obtained provisional status.
No. I think the viewer should understand the way the program works. If you legalize during the first 10 years, you have no permanent status in the United States of America. You have a provisional status. It allows you to work, pay all your taxes, learn English, go through a background check, and after 10 years, you can then apply for what is called a green card, right? Permanent residency. You must stay in permanent residency for 5 years. That's 15 years. And then you can apply for American citizen. Should you achieve American citizens 15, 16, 17 years down the road, you may have somebody who's still young enough for you to apply for, but I doubt it very much.
All right, Sandy. Abilene, Texas, Republican caller. Hi, Sandy.
Hi. I am concerned. I watched the marches of 2007, and you can still get them on YouTube. And there were literally hundreds of thousands of these young, what we call dreamers, dragging our flag through the street, spitting on our flag, letting their children urinate on our flags, hanging our flag upside down under the Mexican flag. And now all of a sudden they are all dream children. They're all valedictorians. And I want to know, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that these people don't really love America. They want to take America, but I don't think they really love America.
All right, we'll take that point.
I don't know what video she saw. I marched in Chicago, and I can tell you what I saw was American citizens with people from their neighborhoods and their communities marching with American flags, saying, I love this country. Now, did you see people with flags from other countries? Yeah, you saw some of that. You don't see that anymore. I used to go out and say, hey, listen, if you want to become an American citizen, if you want to stay here, carry an American flag. That is a job, but I don't remember people I would have been the first one to stop any such just nonsense from occurring. No, this is about really a love for this nation and wanting to be finally accepted completely in the United States of America. I'm sorry that she saw that. I'll look it up on YouTube, but I haven't seen it, and I would be the first to denounce it.
All right. Alice in Morganville, New Jersey, Democratic caller. Hi, Alice.
Hi. Thank you for explaining everything this morning, Representative Gutierrez. And what I do have one other question, though. Is there something that's going to be in there, maybe grandfathering these 11 million people, and then going forward after that, would something happen to employers? Would they get fined if they start to hire other people?
All right, Alice.
She's right on target. So what's the first thing that we want to achieve? First thing we want to achieve is any job created in America, the first person that gets a crack at that job is an American, someone born here, any job in America. In order to try to guarantee that, one of the things you have to do is you have to have a verification system. That is when you show up to work. I got to tell you, my grandfather was the first Gutierrez to get a Social Security card, right? Back in the late 30s, early 40s. I can just imagine the perforations and him taking it out, right? Trying to figure out how it doesn't get destroyed because it was on a flimsy piece of paper. My grandson, 4 generations later got his Social Security card in the mail too. Come on, there's got to be a better way that your primary identification for employment be a little piece of paper that has no biometrics on it. I mean, your ATM card has more protections on it, and an electronic strip on the back of it, and tells you more about who possesses it than the card that you get a job with. We've got to change that. So we do change that. We do a verification system. That means everyone in America has to first check. When you go to an employer, the employer puts your information and it says, and the federal government says, okay, he's okay. And if you hire that person without getting the okay of the federal government going into the background check, then I think we should do exactly what we do to people when they don't pay their taxes. We should put them in jail for violating the law. But she is right. You're going to need vigorous action against unscrupulous American citizen employers who want to hire undocumented workers. That's in the bill, and I think it's fundamental and critical to establishing security in this country.
Just to be clear, jail time in the bill?
Absolutely.
It's in the bill.
They should go to jail. Yes, and they should go, but it's got to be enforced. I mean, everybody always likes the scene of rounding up the illegals. I want to round up those employers after we do comprehensive immigration reform that want to violate the law.
All right, we'll go to Ed, Annapolis, independent caller. Hi, Ed.
How you doing? You stole my thunder because that's my big thing. The employers that are hiring people that they, quite frankly, do know are illegal, not only should they be put in jail, they should also have to pay all the back Social Security that should have been collected from these people, and all the back they should be able to have to pay what they would have paid in income tax. They should be fined to the hilt. And if they go out of business, quite frankly, that's a bonus to the country.
Well,
I'm a descendant, quite frankly, I suspect, of an illegal Irish immigrant, my grandfather.
All right. Congressman?
Well, first of all, I think we need to have ability to enforce the law. But a couple of things that the caller, I think, is important. Number one, when you legalize 11 million people, you put them on the books so that now unscrupulous American employers, right, cannot keep them off the books. You actually collect those taxes and send it to and send the revenue so that you can maintain the government that they're supposed to be there to maintain. Number one. And number two, yes, we should go after employers that decide that they're going to violate the law. But you need a verification system in order to do that. Because you just can't go after employers. You have to say, hey, if you use this system, you're safe, right, from prosecution from the federal government. If you don't use this system, we're coming after you. But it puts people on the books. I believe that's where we want our American workers.
All right. Well, let's talk to Gary next in Dallas, Texas, Republican caller. Hi, Gary.
Hi. Yeah, I have a quick question about the child tax credit. So if they're still here and they're applying for citizenship and they're paying their back taxes, how about the billions of dollars that they're claiming for child tax credit for people that are not in the country, that really don't exist? And while they're still here each year that they are here in the future, are they still able to continue to claim child tax credit for people that are not here?
Well, you're asking me to respond to if they can do something illegal, because it's illegal what you're proposing. I can't do it, Greta can't do it, nobody can do it. And when you do it, you're supposed to go to jail because it's obviously a felony to file your income tax returns falsely and claim credits from the federal government. So I don't know what the answer is other than we need a crackdown on people that do that. I don't know that there's anything specifically from the community. But I will say this. Look, we're going to put them on the books. We're going to have them pay federal income tax and file those federal income taxes. And we're going to make sure that they don't get one benefit. Let me reiterate. The Senate bill says the following. You come forward, you go through a background check, make sure you're not a criminal, you take English and civics classes, we give you a work permit, and for 10 years you pay every last dollar. But there isn't one means-tested program that you are eligible. So you pay all your taxes, but you cannot get a benefit. And let me reiterate, it says, and this is primary language in the bill, and it's language that we will adopt in the House, you are excluded from any subsidies in the Affordable Care Act. And that is really the government subsidy and the government portion. Now, if you're going to get health care, you've got to go out there and get it at your employer or pay it out of your own personal pocket. So don't think this is amnesty, because that's a pretty tough proposal to make to somebody, to pay all taxes and not be able to get a single cent of the dollars your taxes are sent to support.
The Washington Post editorial yesterday.
Nays are 183, the nays are 235. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 9, printed in Part B of House Report 113-131 by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, on which further proceedings are postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendments.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part B of House Report number 113-131, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Again, the underlying bill would expand offshore drilling. An amendment by Republican Paul Brown of Georgia would place a 60-day time limit on judicial review of claims arising from new offshore drilling. It would curtail access to the courts by plaintiffs and institutes. It would institute a loser pay requirement for court costs. There are 2 more amendment votes following this.
On this vote, the yeas are 217, the nays are 202. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 10, printed in Part B of House Report 113-131 by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Grayson, as modified, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in Part B of House Report number 113-131, offered by Mr. Grayson of Florida as modified.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The House is finishing up work on a bill started yesterday that would direct the Interior Secretary to implement a 5-year oil and gas leasing program off the Atlantic and Pacific coast, including areas off California, South Carolina, and Virginia. The administration Wednesday issuing a veto threat on the bill, saying in part it would require the Department of Interior to open a number of new areas on the OCS, the Outer Continental Shelf. This action would be directed without secretarial discretion to determine whether those areas are appropriate for leasing. That's part of the statement on administration policy from the White House. Paul Brown's amendment here, Alan Grayson of Florida with an amendment that would state that nothing in the bill should be construed as affecting the right of any state to prohibit the management, leasing, development, and the use of lands, including offshore oil drilling. One more amendment vote after this one.
On this vote, the yeas are 209, the nays are 210. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 11, printed in Part B of House Report 113-131 by the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Capps, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendments.
Amendment number 11, printed in Part B of House Report number 113-131, offered by Mrs. Capps of California.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
H.R. 2231 would expand offshore oil and gas leasing and drilling. It is opposed by the administration. They have offered a veto threat against the bill. One last amendment vote here by Democrats from California, including Lois Capps of Southern California, which would protect Southern California from the offshore drilling mandated in the plan.
On this vote, the yeas are 176, the nays are 241. The amendment is not adopted. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute, as amended. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 2231, and pursuant to House Resolution 274, I report the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 2231, and pursuant to the House Resolution 274, reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Is a separate vote demanded on any amendment to the amendment reported for the Committee of the Whole? If not, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is on the engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act to increase energy exploration and production on the Outer Continental Shelf, provide for the equitable revenue sharing for all coastal states, implement the reorganization of the functions of the former Minerals Management Service into distinct and separate agencies, and for other purposes.
We're going to recommend. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Snyder of Illinois moves to recommit the bill H.R. 2231 to the Committee on Natural Resources with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Add at the end the following title: Miscellaneous Provisions, Section Prohibition on Drilling for the Oil and Gas Underneath the Great Lakes.
I ask for unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. House will come to order. House will come to order. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the time. This is the final amendment to the bill, which will not kill the bill or send it back to committee. If adopted, the bill will immediately proceed to final passage as amended. I rise to offer this motion to recommit to ensure, first, that one of our nation's most important natural resources, our Great Lakes Basin, is protected from untenable energy exploitation risk, and second, that as we explore additional ways to boost domestic energy production, we do so with an appropriate emphasis on creating jobs here in America. Our Great Lakes are truly unique. Within these lakes sit 95% of the United States surface water and 20% of the world's surface water. Straddling the United States and Canada, the Great Lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Ontario, and Erie have more than 10,000 miles of coastline touching 8 states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New York. Not only a critical source of drinking water, the lakes are integral to the country for transportation, power generation, and recreational opportunity. Over 30 million Americans in cities, towns, and rural communities depend on the Great Lakes for their lives and livelihoods. In fact, according to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Action Plan, taken as a whole, the Great Lakes region economy would be the second largest economy in the world, second only to that of the United States. The Great Lakes support an incredible biodiversity, including almost 200 species of native fish and scores of species found nowhere else in the world. In short, as one of our nation's greatest treasures, we cannot put the Great Lakes at risk from oil and gas drilling of any kind. My amendment is quite simple and straightforward. With it, I only seek to ensure that the Great Lakes will remain protected and off limits from unjustifiable environmental risk. It safeguards Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Superior, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario from potentially detrimental and irreversible harm, and provides necessary protections against potentially irresponsible exploitation of our natural resources. In my own state, the Great Lakes annually contribute over $200 billion in economic activity for Illinois. Lake Michigan alone provides drinking water for 7 million Illinois residents. It brings 20 million visitors annually to Illinois, supports 33,000 jobs, and generates $3.2 billion in economic activity. As we explore ways for the United States to become more energy independent, we cannot lose sight of the importance of protecting our environment and establishing common sense rules of where and how we can effectively, safely utilize our natural resources. Preserving the prohibition on drilling the Great Lakes provides economic security to thousands of businesses, large and small, that depend on the lakes every day for trade, recreation, and tourism. It also protects the health of our communities and the health of our wildlife. Let me be clear. The underlying legislation, while focusing on drilling in the Outer Continental Shelf, has other provisions that relate to domestic energy production and may, when implemented, have implications for the Great Lakes. The bill specifically restricts oil and gas leasing in the eastern Gulf of Mexico and should also include a restriction on new oil and gas leasing in the Great Lakes Basin. This clarifying amendment is therefore necessary to ensure that our energy policy does not compromise our Great Lakes ecosystem, does not threaten our single greatest freshwater supply, and does not unduly put our Great Lakes Basin economy at unwarranted risk. In addition to protecting the Great Lakes, the amendment I am proposing today would also encourage companies seeking leases to drill for oil and gas found in America to use materials and products made in America. The additional provision will ensure that U.S. oil and gas resources will benefit American workers, as well as provide new business opportunities for American manufacturers. As we pursue a diversified energy portfolio, we must continue to ensure that America's natural resources benefit the American people and are not unfairly diverted to the benefit of foreign suppliers and foreign workers. Mr. Speaker, the essential provisions of this amendment will only improve the underlying bill while protecting American jobs and our environment. I strongly urge my colleagues to support these common sense changes. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I claim time in opposition to the motion.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes. House will come to order.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this motion. This motion epitomizes what's wrong with Washington's Democrats' energy and economic plan. Let's start with the obvious. The obvious is the Great Lakes are not part of the Outer Continental Shelf. The second thing is the current law already provides for offshore drilling to be done using American goods and services wherever practical. So their MTR doesn't make any sense at all. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, this week offers a true contrast between two visions for how to fuel our economy and to build manufacturing jobs. One vision was laid out by the President earlier this week.
House